As the final days of the battle for Berlin unfolded, the city had become a surreal blend of ruin and relentless violence. Streets that once carried the normal rhythm of life were now broken. Scarred pathways lined with rubble and the detritus of desperation. Smoke hung in the air like a stubborn fog, carrying with it the acrid tang of burning buildings and the unmistakable metallic sting of blood. In the midst of this chaos, a small but strategically critical bridge emerged as a focal point for both hope and tragedy. Capturing it seemed essential, not just tactically, but symbolically. A last-ditch effort to hold on to some fragment of control amid the crumbling remnants of the Reich. Yet what played out on and around that bridge would become a stark illustration of futility. A microcosm of the wider collapse of Nazi Germany. Orders came down from commanders who themselves were caught in the web of ideology, pride, and panic. The situation was grim. Berlin was surrounded. The Red Army was advancing relentlessly, and the city's defenders were exhausted, undertrained, and poorly equipped. Many were teenagers and old men, conscripts pulled from schools, factories, and retirement homes, armed with little more than rifles and a fragile hope that sheer determination might somehow bridge the gap between reality and the fantasy of victory. Yet the bridge remained a non-negotiable objective. The chain of command insisted on its capture, framing it as a potential gateway to a counteroffensive, a chance to reclaim initiative, and, above all, a way to maintain appearances. Victory, or at least the illusion of it, was to be asserted at any cost. What followed was a charge that history would remember less for its tactical impact and far more for its tragic inevitability. Soldiers were sent forward into an environment they could scarcely hope to control. The Red Army, seasoned and mercilessly efficient after years of grueling conflict, had fortified the area with a combination of machine gun nests, artillery, and snipers. The attackers, by contrast, were often in disarray. Communication lines were fractured. Morale was wavering. And any semblance of coordinated strategy had long since been undermined by the grinding pressure of constant bombardment and retreat. And yet, despite the obvious odds, the order to advance was given, and the doomed charge began. It's impossible to overstate the psychological weight of what these soldiers faced. Imagine stepping forward into a no-man's land that was less a battleground than a carefully constructed funnel of death. Each step carried the potential for instant obliteration, and yet there was no choice. Hesitation meant punishment, insubordination, or a slow, ignominious death elsewhere. Ideology, discipline, and fear combined to create a momentum that propelled them toward a fate that was, from the outset, all but sealed. They ran, crouched, and scrambled over shattered streets, weaving through debris and makeshift barricades. Their every move met with the unflinching precision of an enemy who had been waiting for this very moment. From above, the scene might have seemed almost choreographed. A tragic pageant in which human will and institutional insistence collided with reality. Men fell in rapid succession, some before even reaching the halfway point. Their bodies scattered across the broken pavement like rag dolls. The sounds were relentless. Bursts of gunfire, the whistle of incoming shells, the shriek of mortars, and the cries of those who were hit or trying to help the wounded. Time seemed to stretch. Each second waited with the knowledge that there was no way forward that didn't involve immense suffering. And yet, for those who survived the initial onslaught, the bridge itself became an almost surreal prize. A narrow strip of concrete and steel that represented both hope and death in equal measure. Reaching it was no guarantee of survival. Holding it was virtually impossible. What makes this charge particularly haunting is the stark contrast between intent and outcome. The commanders envisioned a tactical victory, a foothold that could be leveraged into a larger maneuver, a way to slow or even halt the Soviet advance. In reality, the bridge functioned as a grim filter, one that separated life from death almost at random. For those who reached it, The expectation of heroism and success was immediately confronted with the unyielding reality of enemy fire and crumbling infrastructure. Artillery tore through reinforcements. Snipers picked off exposed figures. And any attempt at organized movement dissolved under the weight of chaos. The bridge was never a gateway. It was a trap. And those who crossed it were caught in a liminal space between hope and annihilation. Yet amid this devastation, there were moments that defy easy categorization. Acts of courage, desperation, and even humanity appeared in fleeting flashes. Soldiers would drag comrades from the line of fire, sometimes paying for it with their own lives. Others would use the wreckage to mount brief, futile defenses, staving off death by inches or seconds. These moments, however, did little to alter the outcome. They were human sparks against an overwhelming darkness. Temporary defiance in a scenario that had been predetermined by circumstance, command, and the inexorable advance of the Red Army. Every act of valor was, in the end, a reminder of the tragic inefficiency of human bravery when it is marshaled toward impossible objectives. It's also important to understand the broader psychological and symbolic dimensions of this assault. For the Nazi leadership, the bridge represented control, honor, and the illusion of an achievable victory. For the soldiers, it was a narrow channel between life and obliteration. A task that had been imbued with existential significance far beyond its military value. And for the Soviet forces, it was a choke point to be defended with ruthless efficiency. A final stage where the desperation of the enemy could be turned into tactical advantage. The clash of these perspectives created a scenario in which ideology and reality were not merely in conflict. They were violently misaligned, producing consequences that were both predictable and horrifying. Historians often point to this charge as an example of the lethal combination of desperation and doctrine. Orders were given, and obedience was demanded, even when the tactical rationale was questionable or non-existent. The result was a human wave that could not, and did not, achieve its objective. Yet analyzing it purely in military terms misses the human tragedy at its core. These were people. Young, scared, sometimes barely trained. Pushed into a situation where the rules of survival were suspended and replaced by the abstractions of honor, duty, and ideology. Their experience, captured in fragmented accounts and haunting photographs, conveys a reality that no strategic diagram can fully represent. The terrifying intimacy of death in urban warfare. The exhaustion of spirit under relentless pressure. And the stark, cruel arithmetic of conflict in which numbers, firepower, and terrain dictate life or death more than courage or intent. Ultimately, the doomed charge for the bridge became a symbol of the final collapse of Nazi Germany. It demonstrated how a regime, in its death throes, could demand sacrifices that served little purpose beyond the preservation of illusion. It showed how ideology, desperation, and command failure could combine to create outcomes that were tragic, predictable, and utterly futile. And it illustrated a universal truth about warfare and human endeavor. No matter how noble or determined the intent, if the structural conditions are overwhelmingly against you, bravery alone cannot alter the inevitable. The bridge was never meant to be taken. Its capture was an illusion, a cruel misdirection that exacted a terrible toll. In reflecting on this moment, it's tempting to see it as simply another historical footnote. A minor tactical episode in a larger campaign. But that would be to miss its resonance. The bridge stands as a stark lesson in the limits of human agency when constrained by circumstance. The dangers of blind obedience to flawed orders, and the catastrophic consequences of underestimating reality. It is a reminder that in war, as in life, determination and courage are not always enough to overcome the harsh arithmetic of power, preparation, and circumstance. And for those who witnessed it firsthand, both the participants and the survivors, the bridge became more than a piece of infrastructure. It became a symbol of futility, a monument to lost lives, and a lens through which we can understand the human cost of strategic miscalculation. Looking back on the doomed charge, we are forced to confront a paradox that recurs in the study of conflict. The same qualities that can produce heroism, discipline, courage, commitment, can, when misapplied, produce tragedy. The soldiers who surged forward toward that bridge did so with the same resolve that had carried human beings through countless conflicts over centuries. Yet this resolve, untethered from strategic reality and funneled through flawed command decisions, became a mechanism of destruction. The bridge they could not take was not just a crossing over water or land. It was a crossing over hope into despair, an inevitable confrontation between human will and brutal circumstance. And in that confrontation, we see the essence of the battle for Berlin, and perhaps the essence of human conflict itself. A relentless test of resolve against odds that are often insurmountable. And a reminder that even the most determined effort can be swept aside by forces beyond our control.